Welcome back to Fireside Giants. You're with your host here, Alex. Today we're talking about a rising star on the defensive side of the football, second-year cornerback Andrew Phillips, who's coming off one of the best performances of his young career. Honestly, one of the best performances from a cornerback in the league up to this point in the season. And Drew Phillips is taking massive steps in the right direction. Now, obviously, beating the Chargers last week is a big deal for the whole team, especially rookie quarterback Jackson Dart. We lose Malik Neighbors. Other guys are going to have to step up. Jalen Hyatt's of the world, Slayton's, Wandale's, even maybe an undrafted free agent like Bo Collins. But they're going to have to manufacture that production one way or another. But we saw the defensive identity shine through. If you guys watched our interview, kind of analysis and breakdown of the game on Monday with Carl Banks, you saw him say that defensive line, that pass rush is their identity. They are a problem, verbatim. This is a unit that could be, and honestly looked like it this past week, the best pass rush in football, with Abdul Carter and Kayvon and Burns and Dexter Lawrence had, I think, 20 combined pressures in the game. It's an absurd amount. Carter finally let loose as the primary pass rusher instead of playing off by linebacker, looked the part of a third overall pick. And as a rookie, I have to say he's exceeding expectations. You know, Kayvon Thibodeau's finally there in year 4. I'd argue Abdul Carter is there in year 1. So I think we're seeing a lot of really good stuff from this pass rush and the identity, and Shane Bowen will give him credit too. Called a pretty solid game. But I want to talk about Drew Phillips. This secondary, obviously, they have some bumps and bruises. Javon Holland kind of left last week and then came back late in the game. The safeties have been a little bit, you could say they look like they lack chemistry, and their tackling angles have been a bit poor. Technique has been a bit poor. We saw Dane Belton's angle on that deep ball to Quentin Johnston. It was a bit poor on the touchdown. And then obviously we saw Tyler Nubin miss a couple tackles, but for the most part, Nubin has also flashed upside. But Phillips specifically in every facet has been, I would say, tremendous in terms of this past game as a run support piece, as at playing the nickel cornerback spot. In coverage, he was sticky. And I kind of want to take a look at some of his stats from this past game. So let's add it here to the stage. So looking at it, just at, first glance, you see Phillips, the highest graded player of any defensive piece on this Giants defense against the Chargers. He was elite in coverage. He was elite at tackling, and he was elite in run defense. And, this is a player that we've talked about in the past, kind of shows up in big moments, third down specifically. We've seen the Giants many times kind of, rely on players like this to bail them out of third and long situations. But I actually think he thrives in third and short situations. We've seen, teams try to run these quick outs and short route concepts, and Drew Phillips is just there. And a lot of times they use their slot receivers to achieve that goal because, they have them kind of tailing out to the outside and whatnot, or sitting down in coverage, and Drew Phillips just is everywhere. So you kind of love to see, him standing out and performing at this level. He had 2 tackles this past week. He had 2 receptions on 7 targets for only 10 yards. He had 3 pass breakups. So pretty impressive. And, just looking at what he's done so far, he has 8 passes defended. He currently leads the NFL with 8 passes defended, and he's tied for third with 2 interceptions. He's been a player that's stepping up in big moments, and I think that is really what they wanted from him. Second-year guy out of Kentucky. Sometimes, those guys from Kentucky takes a couple of years to develop and kind of get there, Wandale being one of them. But Drew Phillips has stepped up at a 92.3 grade from PFF, the highest, like I mentioned, on the Giants in general. And an elite bounce back performance, after that kind of game against Kansas City where he had a couple penalties and it wasn't looking so good. You kind of look at that performance specifically, gave up 82 yards, a touchdown, did have 1 PBU, but did also have 3 penalties in that game. So, the Giants watched him get picked on, but I think the sign of a great player is one that bounces back really fast, one that can kind of step up and take his game to another level when his back's against the wall. And Drew Phillips not only did that, he locked down one of the best offenses in football. Now, I know the Chargers pass rush, or rather their offensive line struggled, and the Giants pass rush was tremendous, but he was targeted 7 times. 7, you could say they were trying to pick on Drew Phillips, and he was not going to let it happen a second time. He stepped up and bounced back in a big way, and that's what good players do. Sometimes they have bad performances, but they step up and kind of recover there. And look, nickel corner, one of the most difficult positions in the league, simply because there's so much space. If you're a boundary corner, you have the ability to use the boundary as kind of that extra man. You can push and press receivers to that boundary. They're kind of limited in space at times. But as a nickel corner, you got to worry about the boundaries. You got to worry about the middle of the field. You have to help in run support. You're kind of a jack of all trades. And Drew Phillips has proven to be that. And I think that that's really exciting. Just being so active against the run. And I think that's kind of what we saw in the past where we were lacking. And you remember like guys like Darnay Holmes and whatnot, even Cordell Flott, Darnay Holmes was decent against the screen and sometimes okay against the run, but he really struggled in coverage. Drew Phillips has the capacity to be straight up elite in coverage and straight up elite against the run. He is fearless. I mean, he's not a big individual either. Drew Phillips, obviously, 23 years old, 6'1", 187. He's not a humongous person by any means. So, just looking at him and his frame, he plays bigger than that. He plays like he is 6'2", 220 pounds. He plays like a linebacker. I mean, it does lend itself to a more injury probability, but that's okay because, football, you get injured. You can't avoid these things. But I do love the fact that he plays bigger than his frame. I do love the fact he's aggressive in the run game. He's aggressive in coverage. He's not afraid to take a chance to try to pick up an interception. This is a player that I do think has a bright future and is only in his second year, obviously as a mid-round, third-round pick. He is on a 4-year rookie contract. Obviously, doesn't have that 5th-year option, which is unfortunate. But you get 2 more cost-controlled years of a third-round pick who's playing like a Pro Bowler already. I know he had that one tough game against the Chiefs, but if he has more performances like this, he could be labeled a Pro Bowler this year. And honestly, the Giants have a couple defenders who could be in that category, whether it be Dexter Lawrence or Carter or Thibodeau or Burns, and all 4 of those guys really have the capacity to be Pro Bowlers or somewhere in that range. But Drew Phillips, one of the best budding nickel corners in football. I'd say he is their best cornerback at the moment. And I'd say the film shows that. I'd say the eye test shows that. And, even if he does get picked on sometimes, if he does get into some trouble, this is a player that has the most upside. He does flash it. You kind of watch players like, Paulson Adebo and Deontay Banks and Cordell Flott. And you see flashes, but it's so inconsistent. It's one flash and then it's, 10 bad plays. And Adebo has, obviously been picked on at times. The tackling technique has been a bit flawed, but, we talked to Carl Banks about that and we got carried by Omarion Hampton 20 yards. And, truth of the matter is, other guys got to rally to the football and help him out there. So, do you think there's team orientations and then there's individual performance, perspectives? But when it comes to Drew Phillips, this is an individual talent. I think that he really elevates the floor of this defense to a pretty large degree. I think defensively, this is a unit that is starting to kind of carve out the statue here. It was just kind of a ball of clay, or rather a ball of marble. And now you're kind of etching away. You're seeing, okay, like this is the pass rush is starting to show up, but you got a really good nickel cornerback in Drew Phillips. You have some talent at cornerback. There's still a little bit of lapses in judgment, sometimes poor tackling technique, which is coachable. And then you have the safeties who, Tyler Nubin has flashed that upside. It's inconsistent, but there's been flashes of good, flashes of bad. Javon Holland hasn't necessarily made the impact I was hoping up to this point, but we'll give him more time to kind of acclimate to this new system, acclimate to this new team, and also learn the tendencies of his cornerbacks. Because, when you're covering that deeper portion of the field, the second that he was off the field, well, what did they do? They went downfield to Quentin Johnston, had a big play with Dane Belton back there in coverage. So, he is your best. He is going to cap the defense. He is going to be that kind of stopper due to his speed. But when he's off the field, you see the liabilities there. They're going to try to take shots downfield. And obviously there are problems in the secondary. I think that the Giants are actively working on those. And look, the best friend to a secondary is a good pass rush, as we saw a couple interceptions last week, one of them being from Dexter Lawrence. But, I do think that as long as this defense is taking steps in the right direction, as long as this pass rush maintains their pace right now, the secondary should gradually improve. We should see, better from them. And obviously the linebackers with Bobby Okereke and Darius Muasau, a lot left to be desired at times. I think Okereke he's an average player at this point. I don't think he loves this system. I think he was better under Wink Martindale. But with that being said, we just need him to be a cleanup, like just clean up tackles, finish them, plug the holes in the running game. And that needs to be his job. Darius Muasau, we really kind of miss Micah McFadden right now. I can't wait for him to return at some point this year. But he's also in a contract season. So, you could, I guess, logically say the Giants will probably extend Micah McFadden on a really cheap deal because, well, he's been hurt most of the season. And I don't know what his market's going to look like, but he is a good player. And I think that injury kind of bodes well for the Giants salary space and, what they can do there for an extension. But he might take a 1-year deal and try to leverage that. So kind of like a reset. But, when he does come back, I'm excited to see his role. And look, this defense does have a lot of talent. The scheme has been bad at times. And I think that's mainly because they were just so inexperienced together as a group. But credit to Shane Bowen again. Like, he has taken steps in the right direction. He has learned from his mistakes. He is figuring out how to maximize this group. So that is a positive, and I do want to kind of highlight that fact. So credit to Shane. And then Drew Phillips. This is a young budding star. Like, there's nowhere else to say it. Like, there's no way else to put it. This is a young player that is capable of being a Pro Bowl, all pro caliber nickel cornerback, and that is extraordinarily valuable in the NFL. The Giants, specifically Joe Shane, assuming he stays, if he does, he has made it apparent that he wants to extend young players early. This is a player next year. I'm extending him before he gets to year 4 of his rookie deal. Like, I'm extending him. Market value is only going to increase. Salary cap's only going up. Extend those young players early. I think that will be massively beneficial to him and the Giants as well long term. So, just keep an eye on Drew Phillips, his performance this year. Of course, we'll do more breakdowns like this in the future, but appreciate your time, my friends. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like button below on the YouTube channel, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.
Perfect.